Hey, my name is Stenseke. I'm Professor of Human Geography at the University of Gothenburg, and I will talk to you about interdisciplinary work with the title, as you see on the screen. It might be a peculiar choice of picture on this first screen, but I think that working interdisciplinary, that's my perspective, is to dare together and to synchronize to some extent this daring together. And as you might see from the picture, it's not that you have to do perfect jumps, but you have to start and you have to try. You have to dare kind of jump into the water together. And some will not dare to do that and will be staying still looking at the other ones. I'll come back to that. In my talk, I will focus on how to work interdisciplinary in practice. That is, how does it work in reality? And I hope that this will also give you some inspiration to dare to jump. Just giving you background then, and that is using the words from my colleague in Australia, the Australian geographer Leslie Head. Why do we need to work interdisciplinary? Well, as she puts it, human influence on the earth and its processes increases, but most of our intellectual weapons in the environmental area have maintained a separation of humans and nature. My point of departures are the societal challenges that we're all facing, and that is kind of formulated in the document from the UN Agenda 2030, when there's so many complex issues that we need to deal with to have a prosperous future as humanity. And my kind of focus area is the somewhat divide often seen and often experienced between natural science in a broad sense and social science and humanities. So the core problem is then we often discuss these kind of as separate fields with separate concept framings, separate traditions. And we have been talking about the need of interdisciplinarity for decades. I think all the time since I myself was a PhD student in the beginning of the 90s, and still so little happens. So personally, I have kind of a mission to address why is it so, and how to kind of deliver, how to work in practice to make this come true, because I think we often kind of call for it, but we do not look into the details of it, what needs to be done. Where I come from, that is the field of biodiversity, and I've been working as a social scientist, a qualitative social scientist in biodiversity research for several decades, and most of the time in collaboration with colleagues from biology. And during that time, and also reading others' experience, because there have been some published in this field on the difficulties in coming as a social scientist into the kind of the field of biodiversity, which naturally is biased by biology. We have kind of perceived or experienced a gradient of attitudes that I put on this slide, and this is not kind of the frame for the whole talk, but just so you see my entry points to it, where on the kind of left side, the more pale side, the start is, or that gradient is that people are ignorant or oblivious that the issue concerns humans, and there's now talking about biodiversity research that is concerning humans and human society, not kind of those kind of biological studies that are just purely into stuff that is on another detailed level in biology. But if it concerns humans and human society, there still are a number of scholars, you've seen in projects, or people, me and colleagues I met, that doesn't even realize that this concerns humans. Going to the next steps, you can run into people that know that there is social science humanities research addressing the issues, but think that, well, this is about people, I kind of fairly know it, I do it myself. So they are not engaged in social science humanities competence in the projects. A bit better is when social science humanities scholars are invited, but still to predefine roles and having a definite approach to what they do, some kind of inviting, this is the box you're going to be in, or this is the question you're supposed to answer, not opening for a broader discussion. And if we then take it all the way to the right, what I really would like to see and what I would like to call interdisciplinarity is that there is a joint addressing of the societal challenges with mutual respect for the various approaches, methods and theories used, the various ways of doing science, and a joint kind of formulation. What are the issues we need to address together and take it from there? When it comes to interdisciplinary and how to reach that kind of the right side of it, working with interdisciplinary, I would like to point at 5 core aspects that will develop on. That's personality, people, problem, concepts, frameworks, and processes. And I see these as kind of very well kind of it's important to be aware of them in the practice of interdisciplinarity, to kind of be prepared to address them and look into them, to handle them, both before and also during the work, interdisciplinary work. As for the first aspect, personality, I take to this, base this on some preliminary results from an ongoing study on an interdisciplinary program or project that is carried out in an international context that we kind of have been looking into and investigating. What do you think, and what could be perceived as kind of good attitudes or favorable attitudes for working interdisciplinary? And one is to be, and these are kind of overlapping, as you see, it's to be interested in real world problems and to make an impact, and in doing so then be open to new approaches and not seeing the difference as a problem. And that also includes then to be willing to listen and to learn and to be challenged. That demands a certain degree of curiosity and listening skills. And it also demands that you have a desire to understand the reasons and motivations and hidden meanings behind what people say, and how and why they conduct the research the way they do. Not just kind of say that, no, that is not correct, or I don't understand that, but kind of try to understand the rationale in order then also to see how you can cope or connect to that in the way you do research. And finally, I would also, of course, like to add that these demands patience. It will take time to make these lessons. It will certainly take time also to do them together. And this will also demand, and this is about this being challenged, and to develop insights in what might need to be explained to collaborators about one's own field that kind of is very basic or you can take for granted, but you might then in these discussions and these interactions with people, with scholars from other fields, realize that there's certain kind of forgotten taken issues in your own field that you need to explain better. And maybe it's even in those fields that there will be some challenges how those are framed. Having said that, I should also add, and that kind of is implicitly in this, that not every scholar is kind of is set or is prepared or is kind of do have the skills, so to speak, or interest to work interdisciplinary. And I don't claim that everyone should do that, but I certainly would stress that more of us need to go in to the field of interdisciplinarity and interdisciplinary interactions in order to address the contemporary societal challenges, because they are complex and there's no single discipline or strand of science that can address them alone. When it comes to people, well, I put chemistry as the first bullet here, And that kind of goes with all different kinds of human interactions. The chemistry is some kind of important. If you're going to go into a project or work with people, you kind of need to have a good chemistry to fit together, to understand each other, to have a willingness to work together, and look at kind of what you can do together, not get stuck in what are the problems is. I would also say that it's a great advantage, or maybe a necessity, to be well rooted in your own field of discipline or your own field of research, so you have something to contribute with. If everyone in the team is, so to speak, a bit on the same level of being broad in the knowledge, of course that could in certain projects be useful, but I would like to see more of the work with where different disciplines, where you bring together quite different expertise, look for what is how you can merge this or interact or couple these various fields, and that would be kind of a very fruitful outcome of that. It has also shown in previous interdisciplinary work that it's advantageous to have some people in it that have previous experiences of interdisciplinary work. As I said before, the call for interdisciplinary has been going on for decades. That certainly had not been the advancement that one could have wished for, but there are people out there that have been engaged in interdisciplinary work and know somewhat kind of the practices or what you can expect or how you need to go about. And it's very good to have some of these on the work or project or program that you are starting. Included in these points, I would also stress the importance of leadership. I mean, it's those that are set to lead an interdisciplinary work needs to have some understanding of the challenges and the what's needed to take the work forward in a promising and good way. Problem is my next item, and this is this memory verse is very important to bring in it. Do not assume that everyone are agreed on the problem. Too many times when I have entered or come into research projects or problem, the problem has already been formulated, and as I said previously, the problem or my research area would already have kind of been defined. People that with less knowledge, what are the approaches, theories, methods, and so on that I work with. I see how I can contribute to the broader issue, but the problem might not be formulated the way I would like it to be, or with the perspectives I bring in. One, I would say, core challenge when it comes to how problems are formulated and also approached is the challenge to bring together quantitative and qualitative research. There's some kind of a divide between how you work on these both sides, so to speak, that often becomes it's difficult because people in qualitative, respectively quantitative and qualitative research, respectively, has not been engaged with kind of the other side, so to speak, and that makes it real challenge to make it fit into how do these really interplay. How do these kind of numbers that I show here to the left, working with indicators in the quantitative way and working on an idea of how these provide evidence and so on. How could that go together with the picture I have on the other side that represent a more narrative approach? So how to capture the sereneness, the joy of fishing, the blueness of the landscape, and those kind of impressions that are important for quality of life, and also for addressing our challenges, see ways forward that also brings good quality of life. How to merge this in a way. Campbell has formulated this kind of, I think that's well captured, to say that if someone come and say, what's the answer to this question? Then the other side might, why is that the question you're asking? So that kind of illustrates the differences, or what you might challenge when you, or get into when you enter the interdisciplinary work, and you first formulate the problem that is from your own perspectives. Concepts and frameworks, that is often brought forward when it comes to interdisciplinary work. And you need to, I would say, this, or at least it's very, very useful to agree on some conjoint understandings of concepts and frameworks that kind of can bring you together and see where you kind of, where you can meet intellectually on equal terms. There are some promising concepts, I would say, that is about where kind of no one owns the issue, so it's not contested in that way, or there's no dominant perspective. And that is like concepts like future, scale, time, practice, landscape, which is my own concept. Is kind of is where the social humanistics and the physicals meet in a delineated place. There are also some risky concepts that I've run across, and maybe this could be debated, but in my understanding, drivers is often getting very complex, because you address drivers, but then you can say it's a first level driver, it's a second level, tertiary, quaternary, or so on, and what is the driver, and what are indirect drivers, and so on. So that is usually a tricky concept to start with. Modeling and system, well, I'm talking as a qualitative researcher, there's certainly a lot of problems raised by in social science humanities to a very systematic view on reality. Not that everything is holistic, but to put it in kind of a systematized model, or with modeling often relating to figure or more instrumental perspectives. That is difficult kind of approaches for a start in interdisciplinary programs, so projects crossing the social science, humanities and natural science divide. I put here in a figure from Luxus at Lund University, which I like, and that is the divide between, or the perspective seen as problem solving research and critical research. We don't have time for the critical research kind of to come to a conclusion when in the critical research of concepts, models, methods, and so used, but it's necessary, the critical research, for refining the problem solving research that, so to speak, goes immediately to the problems and trying to solve it. So we need to have the both at the same time. And an advice is, don't get stuck. Aim for boundary concepts. You might not, you can kind of drown in discussion how to specifically define. The advice would be to use what, so to speak, boundary concept, but you can fairly agree on, but you don't necessarily have to have all the details the right way. But you can agree on a broad approach to what you fairly understand. You can the same way. And one example of that is the Ipus conceptual framework. I have been for 7 years working in the scientific lead of Ipus, and first this was a bit scary, this conceptual framework to me, but I come to kind of like it very much. How I came to love the Ipus conceptual framework, and that is because it serves very well of uniting people or researchers and knowledge holders for various strands, where the kind of broad categories of nature's contributions to people and good quality of life are broad boxes, which also allows for green and blue perspectives, which are really symbolizing various knowledge perspectives, various worldviews even, and how these then are some kind of linked together to understand our impact on nature, but also the quality of nature's impact on us. In the work of Ipus, I've also seen then that this it's really tricky, for example, to understand simple concepts. So you shouldn't take for granted that you do understand, as in this the ongoing and soon upcoming for discussions or approval Ipus assessment on sustainable use of wild species. It turns out that what is wild, what is use, and what is sustainable use, certainly it's not that evident, and it has been treated differently in international agreements or understood differently, or not defined enough. So, not saying that you should go into details, but certainly a number of concepts out there needs to have a more careful look. So even if it's agreed in international documents, you might need to revisit it. Well, finally, something about process, and I have made blue the most important line here, that organizational communication. You need to now allow enough time early for understanding the differences. I tend to talk more and more about the difference between various strands of science, because too often it seems to me the biggest problem is that you kind of presume that you're all very doing the same things, but there are significant differences that you need to be aware of, not to kind of make them hinders, but just to understand what is the kind of the work you have that has to be done, and what's kind of how will the negotiations and the interactions look like. And in that work you need to have mutual respect and what you can call it critical tolerance of each other's perspectives, and also that these could be evolving, meaning that you must respect what the other brings in. But of course you can pose your questions, say, well, this seems peculiar to me, so you're not just accepting it totally, but also demand that you get a good explanation, and that you can pose your questions, so you kind of lay bare what's just a bit itching with those perspectives. Now, there are previous experience of the process, and there are a few papers written, and as I said before, so few people have been through this, so there are experience out there that one could build on. I think in this work, please remember to recognize that interdisciplinary is a specific competence. It doesn't necessarily go with kind of excellence in the infield science. I will finalize some few examples that you might look into. One from my colleagues at University of Gothenburg, they worked in a project called Zorro on management of restoration of eelgrass in Sweden, that where both law and marine biology has had a fruitful interactions to kind of show what could be done or what needs to be done. Myself, I've been participating in the project led by Regina Lindborg, Stockholm University, on woody or treeless pastures that addressed EU subsidies some years ago that kind of said we should have 50 trees per hectare, and that then looked both for ecological perspectives, but also from kind of the farmers that are supposed to manage these, then what could be good outcomes, how to handle this, and showing that 50 trees and kind of that standardized measures certainly is not good for biodiversity, because it's we need a bigger variation, but also that farmers to a large extent can accept if they are also involved and can take part in how could the various management options look like. This is a figure from an ongoing project. It's very small because it's not published yet, but that's an idea from the Land to Sea project, and biodiversity funded project. It shows that an effort to combine a kind of more standardized figure on kind of relations, and from kind of natural science side to more societal side, where it's on the one hand quite instrumental as looking, but in this one you can click on the boxes and kind of broader spectra of relations opens, and to that also supporting information. So it's an effort to combine more numerical knowledge with narratives. Finally, I would like to just end with the attractions of interdisciplinary research that come up in the study that I mentioned preliminary results from. Well, one is the intellectual stimulation of in a broad sense to discuss with various perspectives, and just broadening your sense and understanding of the world. And that is of course then related to that this also could produce applicable knowledge with the potential to make change in real world settings when you combine various knowledges and you also kind of bring it to a level of applicability. It gives you, interdisciplinary research gives you a broader network inside and outside academia that for many researchers is also very interesting and stimulating, and kind of makes the work life within academia more interesting to have this kind of a broader set of people to reach out to, and also gives prerequisites to continue broadening the understanding of and being intellectually stimulated. And I also would say it enhances interest in career options, because we can be sure of that the field of interdisciplinarity, and because the societal challenges are that great or demanding, I would say rather, this will certainly be a field that grows. And there's been increasing recognized in the academic system. It's sometimes said that this is not kind of an area for making career, but I would challenge that, because there's a growing number of journals, there's a growing number of international associations, and the demand from organizations like Ipus and IPCC to bring in interdisciplinary knowledge into the processes. So I see that this is certainly a way forward that will open interesting career options. And why is the Pope here? Well, that was the final event of the last conference I've been to, where we then met one of the biggest influencers in the world, who is also, this was a biodiversity conference, very much interested in biodiversity. Thank you.